New Thought Media Network proudly presents Having Courageous Conversations, where real talk dives deep. Each week we go beyond surface talk. We open our hearts, speak our truths, and dive into the stories that shape us. No scripts, no filters, just powerful, unforgettable conversations about life, purpose, healing, and truth. Join the conversation, because your voice belongs here. Please like, share, and subscribe. Check out our YouTube channel at Having Courageous Conversations or email us at yourshowyourvoice@gmail.com. Now, let's have a courageous conversation.
Welcome, friends, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Having Courageous Conversations, a space where we lean into truth with compassion, curiosity, and a deep commitment to healing. I'm Cheryl Rogers, here with my co-host, Mark Dupuis, and today's conversation is one that invites us to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. This is a conversation about trauma, truth-telling, resilience, and the possibility of transformation, even in places where systems have long resisted accountability. Program note: this will be our final live show for 2025, and we'll be offering replays throughout December, some of our most powerful, insightful episodes of the year, so you can revisit them or catch ones you've missed. And don't forget, you can also find replays on New Thought Media Network's YouTube channel. Please make a note that we will be returning live in 2026 with a brand new day and time. We'll be Thursday, starting again on January 8th at 3 p.m. And we're grateful to be in this space. Our guest today, Laurence Baird, is someone whose life journey has taken him from military service throughout profound humanitarian work on the global stage. His voice breaks silences that have lasted far too long and reminds us that healing is not only personal, it is also a collective journey. So settle in, breathe, and allow this time to be a moment of presence, safety, and open-hearted exploration.
Thank you, Cheryl. It is my honor to welcome Laurence Baird, a veteran, global security advisor, humanitarian worker, and author. Laurence's first book, A Soldier's Cry, Breaking the Silence on Military Sexual Trauma, is a courageous, unflinching telling of his experience of military sexual trauma, something many carry in silence. His second book, A Resilience Redeployed, A Veteran's Road for Exile to Humanitarian Frontlines, follows his journey as he steps out of the military and into international humanitarian work while navigating his own healing, identity, resilience, and purpose. Laurence's advocacy challenges deeply entrenched cultures of silence. His work is powerful, necessary, and deeply human. Laurence, welcome. We are grateful to have you here. And before we begin, I would like to say, I want to acknowledge the courage it takes to bring these truths forward. Thank you for being willing to share so openly with us today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, Laurence, your first book is titled Soldier's Cry, Breaking the Silence on Military Sexual Trauma. Can you take us to the moment when you decided that silence could no longer hold your story?
Absolutely. First, I'd like to thank you, Marge and Cheryl, for having me here today. Um, there's one thing that I've learned, after decades of military, being in the uniform and wearing humanitarian vests, is that sometimes the strongest things in the world, they're not always built from steel, but they're built from courage. From the courage that we have to be broken and the resilience to rebuild where we are. So, as you mentioned, I'm not here today just as an author or security professional, but I am here as somebody that lives with complex realities of trauma, specifically dissociated identity disorder, which is DID for short, as well as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So A Soldier's Cry, actually, The Soldier's Cry was kind of my second book, but it became my first book, mainly because there was just way too much silence around military sexual trauma. And I don't think it's more around, gender or anything like that. But for me, it was a time for men to come forward who have suffered from MST. I grew up under the convention that, men are to remain silent, to, basically suck it up and move on and try and not be distracted by, these things that happen. Unfortunately, my trauma wasn't just military sexual trauma, but I suffered sexual trauma from the time I was 9 years old until I was 20. So, I had childhood sexual trauma. I was traumatized sexually in the Canadian Sea Cadet Corps and, followed on by the military until I finally got out of the military and, trying to find myself. So A Soldier's Cry, it's I think it became MST was starting to kill more of us than the trauma itself. Silence, it does breed shame, and shame is where trauma festers. So DID is a survival strategy. It was kind of a defect. It was a brilliant survival strategy, by a child's mind. And later as an adult mind as well, to be able to endure the unendurable. My system of alters, that's kind of what kept me alive when I couldn't handle the pain alone. And there was many times throughout my life afterwards I couldn't understand why I was who I was, and acknowledging them. It wasn't about being crazy. It was just about honoring parts of me that carried the load when I could not. So when I started writing The Soldier's Cry, and here's the cover of it. Oh, it's kind of disappeared here. This was kind of during the restorative engagement process with the Canadian Armed Forces Class Action Settlement, which started back, I believe it was around 2016, 2017. I didn't get involved in that until around 2019-20. But when I started with the restorative engagement portion, it kind of hit home that, people actually started to believe. And, that was my biggest barrier with one, being a male and, keeping all of this deep inside for so long. And as a child and going through institutions, it was one of those scenarios where you couldn't really go and talk to anybody. Like, who would you talk to? Mm-hmm. And, would they believe you? As a 9-year-old going through childhood sexual trauma, you don't go talk to your parents. They're just going to say, well, you're just full of hogwash and, carry on and go have a good day. And then when you get into the institutions, you're already kind of brain formed in that you can't talk to anybody. So then it becomes a problem with the institution, and that kind of carried over into the military as well.
Mm-hmm. So without re-traumatizing yourself, Laurence, can you share some of the emotional or identity-based fallout that followed your experience? How did it change how you saw yourself?
Honestly, Cheryl, this has been kind of a work in progress for many years. I didn't really realize who I was until about 2018-ish. And that was after the loss of a very promising career, one that I loved. I was a humanitarian security advisor going into the field, first one in, wearing multiple hats, and not always being the security guy, sometimes, the finance and the HR. And I kind of thrived on that. And that was kind of a bit of a healing process for me, was being able to be in the front lines. My military career was absolutely stolen from me. I just couldn't, I was acting out at the end of my military career. Nobody could understand why, not even me. I knew I was being traumatized, but nobody was listening. I did attempt suicide 3 times towards the end of the military, all unsuccessfully, fortunately, because I'm here today. But I guess I started writing a book, or not a book, sorry, I started writing a blog back around 2016, 17, after I lost this very prestigious career that I was in. And I kind of turned that blog into a weapon, and it wasn't really me. I was being hijacked by the different alternates that I have inside of me with the DID. And I didn't realize at the time that I was burning a lot of bridges. And, it was a very difficult time for me trying to regain my footing into the humanitarian world. So, when I started working where I am now, it just seemed, and going through the restorative engagement process, it seemed to put things a little bit together for me. Veterans Affairs Canada was able to put me through, active therapy, which really helped as well. And that's kind of where the second book came out from. It was born from the blog. I had all of the pieces together.
Before you go on, for those of us that don't know what DID is, can you tell us what the acronym stands for?
Yeah, sure. DID is dissociative identity disorder. It was formerly known as MPD, which is multiple personality disorder.
Okay.
But then I don't know how it fits. When people have multiple personality disorder or DID, there's times when people actually change. Like I would be talking to somebody else. In my case, it's internal workings inside my brain. So I have 7 different alternates. And over the last 5 years, I've been very, very patient with all 5 of them. And I've created a format now where we can all sit around kind of a table. So if you think of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, that's kind of the way we sit now. And when we have a problem or when we need to address an issue, we actually now start to collaborate with each other, as opposed to hijacking me, the host, and doing something stupid like I did a number of years ago with that blog. I didn't realize I was doing something like that until after the fact.
Okay. So you're saying that you used it as a weapon. In what way?
Well, I kind of turned things around on, a lot of very close colleagues of mine where I was formerly working. One of the things with sexual trauma, people tend to have addictions that come from that. And one of my addictions was an addiction to pornography. And that was one of the reasons why I lost my previous job, was because I had latent, I thought that I didn't have anything on my computers, but apparently I did, and it was found on the servers. And, I was called into a meeting. I didn't really know what the options were at the time. I just got completely hijacked by anger and, kind of stormed out of the office. I lost my job, and, it was very unfortunate. But because of that, I kind of attacked a lot of very close colleagues in this blog. Initially, the blog started out very well. I was being kind, I was being calm, but then I used it more as a weapon to target people that were very, very close to me. And, it's very unfortunate. I did have one colleague that, kind of saw through my weakness, and he worked with me through my trauma. And he and I, we stayed in contact and we worked together for the past number of years.
So basically, you were taking out your anger and your pain on colleagues through your blog.
I wasn't. My internals were.
Okay.
This is where the dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah.
So I have two which kind of gang up. One is what I identify as the 9-year-old firebrand. So this is a 9-year-old child. And then I also have an accelerator, which when these two components get together, they create havoc. I've got a protector. I've got a few other alternates as well. So I don't want to get into some of the other ones, but these are the core ones that, I've identified. And the protector at the time was kind of just thrown off to the side while the accelerator and the 9-year-old firebrand went ad hoc. And unfortunately, when the host is hijacked, I can see what I'm doing, but I don't have full comprehension of what I'm doing until after the click button is done. And in this case, I didn't have that full comprehension until about 3 years after the fact.
Okay. So that led
Laurence,
you to... Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Was there a moment, whether large or small, that helped you begin the journey back to yourself, or back to or towards a healing journey?
Yeah, absolutely. There was. There was two, but I'll start with the first one, because the first one it was around post-pandemic, maybe around 2020, I guess. The internal workings were really taking a beating on me, and I didn't know which way to go. And so for my childhood sexual abuser, I decided to take action into my hands. I thought I'd, take a chance. And I went to the Ottawa Police Service in Ottawa. I sat down with the detective for about 4 or 5 hours, explaining everything that had happened to me as between the ages of 9 and 13. And that was the first time ever somebody told me that they believed my story. And to me, that was just a huge burden off of my shoulders. Now, prior to this, I had already put in my application for the MST with the CAF class action settlement. And, shortly after, the two came simultaneously, where people were actually listening to my story, understanding my story, and hearing my cries. This had never happened in 40 years up until this point. So those were really two transformative moments in my life. And when my other colleague, the one that forgave me and was able to move on with me through my weakness, saw that I was starting to make an effort, or not an effort, but, it means in seeing what I had done and how I had done things, not just in 2017 and 16, but, years beyond that. It kind of helped me understand that, this was probably one of the main things in my life that was causing me to basically inflict self-harm without realizing it.
So it's almost self-sabotage.
Yeah, self-sabotage, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So you were able to report that and take action, and it sounds like that's when you felt like you were taking your power back and you were being heard.
I was. And, when my first abuser, when we went to court and he pled guilty, that was probably the biggest relief ever, because it wasn't just the fact that somebody believed my story, but now actually somebody was being accountable for it.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the military, they became accountable for it through the class action settlement. I went through the entire restorative engagement process with them, which was the premise to my book.
Wonderful. It's wonderful that you were acknowledged and that people took responsibility, which I'm sure made a huge difference in your life. You mentioned restorative engagement process. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. That was actually quite a long process. for any military people that might be on this video cast today, they might know it. It's a process where we meet with restorative engagement practitioners for a period of time to start planning what information we want to put forward to key military personnel that are selected. And then when we get to that point, we actually have 2 sessions with the Department of Defense representatives. In my case, there was a colonel, a major, and a Navy lieutenant that were on the panel. There was myself and 2 other people that were subject to MST, and we spoke, about, a little bit about what happened to us, and also what we expect the Canadian Armed Forces to do better moving forward in terms of institutional change.
Mm-hmm.
Quick question, MSD?
MST, sorry. Oh, yeah, military sexual trauma.
Okay.
MST, okay.
Yeah, too many
MST.
acronyms.
Yeah, lots of acronyms, exactly.
Lots of acronyms.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Thank you. And so, and how was that for you? How did that process feel?
Initially, it was a bit difficult. When we went through the part of selecting the defense representatives, I was a little bit disappointed. I didn't want to have a cohort of officers. I would have preferred to at least have one NCO on that panel, like a master corporal or a sergeant. Mainly because when I suffered military sexual trauma, it was at the beginning stage of my career. So it was during basic training and my battle school component. So this is a time when, soldiers who are in basic training, the only people they would have to talk to would be their NCOs, going through that chain of command. And I think it would have been more important for NCOs to have an understanding of how military sexual trauma affects soldiers right at the beginning, and kind of have eyes to see what to look for among the ranks. I think if that, in my case, it might have been different. I don't know. This is the 1980s. Would they have seen something different? Maybe, maybe not. But I think now it's a little more important. My son he's going through basic training right now. And one of the things that I worry is, not this happening to him, but I'm hearing how basic is today. And, I'm hearing, on the floor that he's in, there's a separating kind of wall between the male side and the female side. And for me, that's just too close in proximity. I think that needs to be changed. But yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting because you mentioned now your son is going through basic training, and you were, you went through a military career as well. I believe there's a long heritage here of military personnel in your family.
There is. I kind of skipped a generation. My grandfather was a pilot during the Second World War. I joined the military in 1984, and my son just joined. He's halfway through basic training. He's got a month off now before he continues on in January.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about your son being in the military?
I'm beyond proud, and for a number of reasons. He's getting what I didn't get. My career was stolen. I always saw myself as, being a career soldier. Back then we had the 2040 plan, so 20 years or 40 years old, or 40 years old, whichever came later in life, you could retire on a full pension. I don't think I would have been that guy to retire. I think I would have stayed in even till now. And potentially retired, a little bit later in life. So, for him going through it, there's a lot of mixed emotions. He and we talked a lot about various things before he went. We were on the phone, almost every day before he went to basic training. And, he has, I believe, read my first book. So it was a little bit of a warning. And, when he's kind of there, he understood what I went through. And, from what he's been calling me when he's at basic, and he's saying there's nothing like that. It's a lot different. When I went through in the 80s, it was open barracks. Now they're separated by dividers. So it's a little bit less accessible, I think, or less prone to being a victim or a survivor of MST.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot has changed, and it's, I don't know, it seems like these kind of topics are spoken about more nowadays, so it's more in the forefront so that people aren't as afraid to come forward. Would you say that would be the case, or do you think it's still scary for most?
Honestly, I would think it would still be scary for most, and that's kind of why I'm speaking out, is to try and help people understand that, it is scary, but, in order to heal, it's possibly a necessary step. Again, specifically for men, so many men don't. And, even males that don't suffer sexual trauma, but other kinds of trauma, it's still buried within. And, I think men are allowed to be men and not be weak at the same time. I think there's strength in being able to share these stories.
Yeah.
And that's, when I talk to my therapist, she talks in the background when I'm at a session, she goes, I'm doing all the work and she's basically my cheerleader. So it sounds really good to hear that from my therapist, but eventually we'll be diving into the actual nuts and bolts of my therapy. We've been doing a lot of work around, my books and how I'm healing myself at the moment.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great.
You sort of answered a question I was going to ask in a way on the culture of male, female. Do you feel you were, your concerns were addressed in a different way than if you were a female?
I did in the beginning, and I'll be honest, specifically during the restorative engagement portion, because I was paired up with two other females, there was a sense, specifically for one other person, that, I felt a little, I wouldn't say belittled, but just out of sorts because, I was a male. And, I was able to correct that and talk to this person, and, it stung her. The comment that she made, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, it strung a chord with me. But we were able to talk about it afterwards, and, I understood where she was coming from, and she explained it a different way, and she understood, how I might have reacted to the comment as it was.
Good. Good. Yeah, communication is key, right?
It is, and I'm finding that, more and more throughout my career.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a short break. So I invite everybody who's here to type any questions you might have for Laurence in the chat. Don't go away. And these conversations can be heavy. They can stir things in us, but they also open pathways to healing through understanding. So when we return, we'll explore how Laurence moved from survival to advocacy and from personal trauma to global humanitarian service. So stay with us and we'll be right back.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Well, welcome back. So, Laurence, thank you so much for sharing all those experiences and revisiting some of those memories. I know it can be difficult, but I also know that this is part of what you feel as your mission is to not be silenced and to encourage others not to be silenced. So your second book follows your transition from military into humanitarian work. What drew you into that world, and how did that shift or reshape your own healing journey?
That's a great question. Thanks, Shel. Yeah, so my second book, and I'll just show the cover here. Oh, I can't do that. It's weird. Get this thing on. Anyway, so Resilience Redeployed, a veteran's road from exile to humanitarian service. This is where I used my trauma as a compass. So I explore how I took the pain that I've been enduring over all of these years, and I've turned it into a compass for humanitarian work. As I mentioned, this book was kind of written first, and then I just took all the good parts out of my blog and put it together, and got rid of all the bad parts. So the hypervigilance that has been exhausting me at home, it kind of became a superpower in crisis zones like South Sudan, Syria, Niger, Mali, etc. And I think that's what enabled me to be, good at what I do in terms of security risk management in the field. I've learned that my deepest wounds, and others possibly as well, often map to our greatest capacity to serve others. So we're a little more easier to identify, problems that other people may or may not be facing. For example, the hijacked host, and I talk about openly about what happens when the host, the me speaking to you now, gets hijacked by a trauma response. It burns bridges, it scares people. But recovery for me, it's never about getting hijacked. It's about learning how to come back and how to repair and how to build a life big enough. So I started this work. I kind of fell into it. I was really struggling in the early 2010s, and I got a job with the Canadian Corps of Commissioners, and they tasked me on a special mission to in Sudan at the time. It was still one country. So I was based in Khartoum, the capital city, to become the security manager for the Canadian mission in the country. And actually, that wasn't my initial role. It was actually to protect the embassy personnel from a visitor that they had staying, who had sought safe haven at the embassy or mission while I was there. From there, I kind of fell into the humanitarian world. The security director for CARE International contacted me after this. She asked if I wanted to go back to Sudan and reset up CARE International's operations in the Darfur region, which I openly accepted. For me, I was starting to see that being in formerly known as developing countries was great for me. I was able to think steadily and be extremely productive. I find when I'm here and home for too long, I get more time to think, and I try to keep my productivity up as much as possible, but it's just not like being in the field. In the field, it's completely different. At the top of my game, I usually come back, worn out. This is kind of where the C fits into the complex PTSD. As you can imagine, as a humanitarian security advisor or any other humanitarian responder, we do see a lot of things at the onset of any emergency, whether it's a conflict zone, whether it's a natural disaster crisis. And we also carry that trauma with us as well, which is, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about sexual trauma, but it's all these other traumas that we suffer. And, you know, for me coming home, my wife has absolutely been my rock. You know, I give a shout out to my wife always. Without her in my life, I would probably not even be able to do what I do. You know, I come home, she allows me the time to regroup, to cry if necessary, to pray if necessary, and to try and find myself before continuing on with the daily comforts of Canadian life before I go on to my next assignment. So that's kind of, and in the second book, I do talk about some of the missions that I was in. And, you know, I think, you know, I recently lost a really good friend of mine, Mark. You know, he unfortunately, he lost his battle to post-traumatic stress disorder or complex PTSD. I just found out about 3 weeks ago. So he lost this battle back in the middle of October. He wasn't just a statistic. In my eyes, Mark was a warrior, a very close friend. He was a man who carried, you know, more than his share of the world's weight. We often talk about the battles of mental health as if winning means staying alive and losing means you didn't fight hard enough. But that's a lie. You know, Mark, he fought incredibly hard. So I'm getting a little emotional. His loss is a stark reminder that resilience does have a limit if it's done in isolation. We can't ask people to carry this unbelievable burden alone forever. So, you know, here at home, we honor Mark, not just by missing him, which we do deeply, but by fighting for a world where the burden is shared and where there's strong ones, where the strong ones are allowed to be tired, and where, you know, when we say check your mates, it's not just a slogan, but it's a lifeline. So, you know, if I had a glass of something here, Mark, you know, we'll always carry this with us. I love you, brother.
Thank you, Laurence. Cheryl, we can't hear you. I don't know why you're muted. Maybe I'm muted and I don't know.
No, I muted myself because my cat was making a noise here behind me.
Thank you, Laurence, for sharing so deeply and for allowing yourself to be vulnerable, for bringing yourself into this world in expressing all of you. And through you, we can learn. You spoke about having conversations about mental health, and I think it is so important. I have mental health problems myself, and I found that the more I spoke of it, more people would come to me and say, me too. So mine is different than yours. I just want to say thank you for sharing yourself and providing an opportunity for perhaps somebody else to come forward and share what they are doing, how they are feeling, and be open to receiving support as well.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah. And I'm sorry for your loss, Laurence, and for everybody who cared for him as well. You know, I think the work that you're doing is so important for that reason, right? So that people don't feel alone, so that they feel that they can reach out, they can share, and to know where to reach out and share, I would imagine is so important as well. So perhaps you can mention some resources. I don't know if you know any, but certainly there must be a whole lot of them that are available. So I would encourage people even just to Google it, because I know, my life is nothing as traumatic as that. However, we all, I think, experience things in our life that at times we think are the hardest things on earth, and nobody else is experiencing them, and we're all alone, and we think we need to manage it ourselves. And I learned that that wasn't the case. And so I hope others do too. So let's talk about your advocacy. How does that show up in the world?
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Just on the resources, in both of my books, at the front and the back, I do have a list of resources for
Beautiful.
both Canadian and American, veterans and other places to go
Wonderful.
to seek help. So, for me right now, it's kind of beyond self-care. We tell people to practice self-care, but we send them usually back into the system that break them. And, whether it's the military, whether it's the, NGOs, humanitarian sector, or general workplaces, this is where we need to focus on some institutional change. I think my focus is on leaders who understand that mental health, it's not a liability. It's part of the human operating system. And, I am any response person in the humanitarian field. You can't come home and say that you're not affected. There was a point when I was with this organization that I thoroughly loved. I would come home and we would have an after action debrief with a very large psychological institution that was based out of the US. And it was nice, but for some reason they stopped doing that. And I just don't understand why. So I would come home, like I came home from Syria. I came home from the Central African Republic, nearly broken. And there was, I had the resource to talk to somebody. Did I always know, is the blame on me? Sure, I can take a bit of the blame, but I think, the institution also has to say, okay, listen, you've just come back from X country. We are going to set up an appointment with you with this person on this day so you can talk about it and, guide people and kind of make it mandatory and not optional. For me, mental health is extremely important. And if we start losing, with Mark, I don't know what his post-therapy was. I know that, he lost his life on mission in Darfur. And that was extremely tragic. So the organization he was with, which I won't name, I don't know what their after deployment mental health capacity is. I know a lot of organizations, they have only an EAP, which is an employee assistance program. The organization I work with, I have to say is, very, very well done. No organization is perfect, not even the one I'm with, but the one I'm with is better than most when it comes to EAP situations. For example, when I informed my boss about, Mark losing his battle to PTSD, immediately she fired me off the EAP information and, told me to take the rest of the day. And, for me, that is, employers don't have to do that, but I think that's going above and beyond. And that's why I value where I work so much.
EAP?
Employment Assistance Program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, we have acronyms, right?
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that as well. Again, I'll speak about the importance of being open and sharing your story. My daughter was fairly newly diagnosed as a veteran with PTSD, and that you said an acronym with a D in it, and I forget what it was, and I know that is part of her diagnosis as well. And this is years coming, and just recently diagnosed. He was probably in the military in the 80s, I think. Anyway, on a side note, she sent me a message a few minutes ago when we were on the break. She's watching the show right now, and she has a service dog, and the service dog is watching as well. The dog sort of hones in and offers support to others. So I think you're being supported by Charlie as well while you're speaking today, Laurence.
Thanks, Charlie. Good shout out.
That's beautiful, Mark. That's lovely. So, Laurence, you've spoken about institutional responsibility and how in some places, it sounds like organizations are doing better. What do you think needs to happen culturally and systemically to prevent the kind of harm you and so many others endured?
I think organizations need to understand that it's not culturally it's not limited, and what I mean by that, it's not limited to one gender or one race. It's broad, and I think we also have to realize, and again, I'm going to come back to men specifically for the sexual trauma, is as brave and as tough as everybody thinks that men can be, we're not. We might be absolutely shattered and broken inside, which I was, 9 years ago, and it's taken me, this amount of time. I've lost a recent relationship in the last 2 years to a very close colleague of mine here in the KW area. I still don't know why, but I'm assuming it's because of the blog or other reasons. So, I think the institutions need to understand that it's not specific. And I think a lot of organizations are actually looking at, acceptance within the organizations and, understanding. One of the things I was actually working on a couple of weeks ago with my boss was in the workplace, recognizing domestic violence in the workplace. So, if somebody's being a victim of domestic violence at home, how do we recognize it in the office place? And just that is going a long way, because I don't think other institutions or any are probably even doing that much. So we're taking a more proactive stance on some of the things that we're at work.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And on that note, a lot of people who have trauma and who have gone through difficult scenarios often take it out on their spouse, not willingly and not intentionally, but that's how it sometimes plays out. And they say that hurt people hurt people.
I agree 100%. Paula is my fourth wife, and we've been together for 13 years. And as I mentioned, she's been the foundation of everything that I do, and I couldn't be doing what I do without her in it.
That's wonderful. So we are coming to an end. I think the last question, or maybe the second last question, the term resilience is often used casually, but your resilience was earned through really what we could say being put through the ringer. How do you define resilience now after everything you've lived through?
I'm still trying to define resilience. Honestly, many years ago, I spoke with a clinical psychologist who actually worked through the Headington Institute, who worked for the organization I worked for. And I told him that I was previously diagnosed with PTSD, and he looked at me and he says, "You're crazy." He says, "You don't have PTSD. You're one of the most resilient people I know." But I told him, I said, this was a psychiatrist's diagnosis that I do have PTSD from childhood sexual abuse. But he wouldn't believe me. He thought because I was able to carry what I do into the field, that I was just a resilient person and I can handle everything. And I really took offense to that. So the definition of resilience, it's really hard. I think, everybody has their own levels of resilience and their own definition of how to be resilient. Sure, when I go out into the field, I'm probably the most resilient person you can see. When I come home, I'm not resilient. I'm absolute, like I said, I cry, I pray. It takes me a few days to unwind and gather my bearings again. So, resilience is being able to see things and understand them. But I think resilience really is being able to speak about the traumas that you experience.
Right.
I think that's what helps you put that armor on.
Mm-hmm.
I know we have to close, and I think, for anybody out there, if you take nothing else out from today, I just want people to know that you are not your trauma. You are the resilience that you survived it, in terms of definition for resilience. So whether you're navigating your own dark waters or standing on the shore waiting to let someone to come back, know that connection is the antidote to the silence. And I thank you both and everybody out there for letting me share a small part of my story with you today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laurence. I would like to say that if I were to write a definition for resilience, part of the wording I would put in is being able to cry and pray and meditate, whatever feeds your soul, to bring you back, to bring you to grounding, supporting you. That to me should be in the part of the resilience dictionary. What's the word I'm looking for, Cheryl? It's a description of a word.
Definition.
Yeah, thank you. There's a word. Yeah.
So, and thank you for that, Laurence. Thank you for emphasizing that we are not our trauma. You are not your trauma. Those are something that has been experienced, but it's not who you are. And I think that's something that's very important. The other thing, and I heard you pick it up earlier, is that not calling yourself a victim, but a survivor, right? You've survived. You're not a victim. A victim gives away their power. A survivor takes it back. And I think that's important to recognize, that we are all survivors of something, and to be able to call yourself a survivor is really taking back your power. So what comes next in your journey, Laurence?
Well, Christmas. I think I have a trip possibly to South Sudan in the new year. I continue on with my therapy, and I'm working on the third book, but a little slower pace this time, trying to tie in everything. And my wife, she wants me to write a happier book. So, I think I might focus a little bit on a book on some of the pleasant memories that I had whilst, serving in the humanitarian sector more than anything, because there's many of those happy moments, even through the lens of trauma.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful.
Before you close us out, Cheryl,
yes.
I would just like to know the resources that you are aware of, Laurence. Are you able to perhaps send us an email somehow that we can get it out there, what the resources, if somebody is looking for support?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and for those who want to learn more about Laurence's work, both his books are available on Amazon.com or I would imagine .ca as well, /author/L. Baird. And those resources, as he mentioned, are in those books as well.
And I've also got my website now, which is lawrencebaird.com.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful.
And those resources are on that website?
Those resources, perfect, as well as these speaking
perfect.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, Laurence, we honor you for your courage, your voice, and your ongoing commitment to creating change. Thank you for that. Thank you for breaking your silence. I think that's enormous. So as we close, I invite us to hold a blessing for every person whose story has been silenced, for every survivor carrying invisible wounds, and for every soul finding the courage to transform truth into healing. May we remember that resilience is not about hardness. It's about returning to the truth of who we are. May compassion guide our conversations, may courage guide our actions, and may we continue co-creating a world where every voice is safe to speak and every story is honored. And as we head into this beautiful month of many celebrations, we wish each of you happy holidays, whichever you are celebrating, and a very happy, joy-filled new year for 2026. May it be a year of clarity, connection, healing, and expanded possibility. So thank you for being with us today and throughout this year. And thank you again, Laurence, for your presence and your courage. And Marg, any last words before we leave?
I am grateful. I am grateful to be here. I am grateful to be in your presence, Laurence, and to hear your brave words and to know that you're out there doing the work you do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both.
So until next time, go gently, go bravely, and go with an open heart. Goodbye for now.
Bye for now.